Hey folks, Dan Joslyn-Siemiatkoski here to talk to you about preparing for the History of Christianity section for the General Ordination exams. As with the other parts of the GOEs, it's always good to know what it is these questions are meant to assess. And so if you dig around on the General Board of Examining Chaplains website, you'll find that there's three outcomes for the history section. The first is to identify and describe major events and movements in the history of Christianity and explain their importance to the development of Christianity in general and the Anglican Communion and/or Episcopal Church in particular. The second is to explain or analyze the subject, content, and historical context and the importance of major events and movements through the study of a primary text. Third, to evaluate and assess the impact and influence of a major event or movement on Christianity and/or the Anglican or Episcopal Church. So that's a broad brief. And in general, you don't find questions that do all three of these things, but usually one of these three. I found that in advising students on how to prepare for the GOEs, one of the most important things is to do a refresher of the major time periods in the history of Christianity. You'll often find this in the GOE questions themselves. They'll give you time period divisions and to think about things according to different time periods. But just as a quick reminder, there's generally four periods of Christianity. First is early Christianity, which is roughly up to the year 600. Then we have the medieval period, which is roughly 600 to 1500. Then we have the Reformation and early modern period, which is 1500 to 1800. And then the modern era, which is around 1800 and on. As I said before, often the questions will prompt you to think about an issue choosing from several of these time periods. So one of the key things for you to do is to go over your History of Christianity syllabi. And you'll note that these syllabi are divided. Essentially, one semester that I taught with you is early and medieval. Another semester is a Reformation, early modern, and modern. So you want to look at these syllabi and begin to break down developments according to big themes. Now, luckily, if you've taken courses with me, I've already more or less told you what the big themes are in the history of Christianity. It's simply the section headers for my courses will give you this information. If you've been writing reflection papers for me, or if you've done your exams for me, then you'll also know that I often prompt you to think about big themes in those ways as well. So I would emphasize for you to generally think about the general sweep of the history of Christianity. These exams are generally not designed to test in-depth knowledge, but rather to ensure that you have a broad knowledge of the history of Christianity. And so I would study accordingly. I would not try to do a cram session trying to memorize everything about the history of Christianity, but rather think in categories. What are the big themes in early Christianity, big themes in medieval, Reformation, modern, so forth? Who are the key thinkers in these time periods? What are the major texts? I would also encourage you to pay a particular attention to both the 16th and 17th century as it applies to the development of Anglicanism, the English Reformation, and its after effects, and the history of the Episcopal Church. Generally, these questions ask you to include one aspect of either or both of those time periods. So making sure you understand that well. There's been a turn towards thinking about a global history of Christianity, so being able to put some of that into your categories is also important. Some recent exams have asked about the history of women or have offered texts or readings from not only Anglo-American or European dominant contexts, but have also offered African-American resources, for instance. So certainly put in the diversity of the things you've learned into sort of a matrix for yourself. Generally think about broad context and then put your specific examples into those broad contexts. If you look at the questions, they'll say, we have this question, for instance, on authority. Give us an example from X time period and Y time period. So understanding how your sources fit into different time periods is always important. I would really encourage you to look at recent questions for examples. You can see how they're both specific but open-ended. They seek to have you show an understanding of a sweep of Christian history, but don't expect you to have a definitive knowledge of it. Generally, they haven't asked for a specific application of the topic to the context of the current church or society, but be prepared for that as a possibility. As always, look carefully at the rubric that's provided for you and follow it accordingly. I think that covers the major contours of how to study for the history question. If you've taken my two courses in the history of Christianity, the Episcopal Church History and Polity course, and the Anglican Studies course here at Seminary Southwest, you should be well prepared. All right, that's all for now. Good luck with the GOEs.